Chapter 1036 Mourning Soul's Out. The scene in front of them was so peaceful that one could not bear to disturb it. Totoro's dumb and cute appearance made Spirit Guardian, who had always liked to keep a cold face, loosen his expression a bit. Women had always had little resistance to such large, cute, and adorable creatures. However, Jangi did not have the time to enjoy this elegant tune. He raised his hand and directly laid 10-dimensional gates around the Totoro. Then it appeared right in front of it. After seeing the human, the Totoro immediately became wary, and its facial expression gradually changed from dull and cute to ferocious. Jangi did not say much nonsense and directly took out his holy judgment, and a move of Net of Heaven directly covered it. Unexpectedly, that Totoro looked stupid, but actually acted very fast. In the void, as a dozen or so chopping strikes fell down, its speed was fast enough to become a series of residual shadows. Jangi couldn't help but be a little surprised. This fellow, who had a unique sensitivity to space, surprisingly made Jangi's strike not achieve much effect. The speed was even faster than many advanced mutants. Jangi continued to strike without any hurry. The dimensional gate had already enveloped the space around it, forming a natural cage. Even if it dodged as fast as it could, Jangi could continuously change the orientation of the doors and surround it. Then, it was the hunt. Holding the white eagle in his left hand and the holy judgment in his right, Jangi utilized the pistol to shoot while using the void chop to disrupt its movements. Hiss! ... The angry Totoro opened its mouth wide and let out a sharp harumph as a raging frost storm erupted from its body. However, this powerful force was completely absorbed by the dimensional gate in front of Jangi. Jangi was very patient. He was quite curious about this thing and wanted to study it slowly instead of rushing to kill it. Anyway, the guy he had trapped with the dimensional gate would not be able to escape, and it would only be a matter of time before he was captured alive. The Totoro's expression was ferocious, and it was bouncing and dodging all the time, like a flexible meatball. However, it had to dodge the 10 invisible dimensional gates on the one hand, and on the other hand, it had to cope with the attacks that Jangi kept launching, and it became quite wretched for a while. Snort! Snort! Caught off guard, 2 rounds of sacred silver bullets cut through its fur, and blue blood actually flowed out. This thing was... Jangi's eyes slightly dilated. A creature? The source elf was nothing more than an energy body and could not possibly have blood. After being captured, it would also turn into pure origin power for the mutant to absorb. But this Totoro was clearly not a source elf. Surely there is something fishy. What exactly was it? Jangi became more and more curious about the Totoro in his heart, reinforcing his idea of capturing this fellow alive. The poisonous miasma that had erupted to exterminate half of the kingdom because of the existence of the source of God had not killed it. Instead, it allowed it to gain the power to be close to the companion of the source of God. This fellow, he must have some special ability. The Totoro nimbly leapt in the air, dodging the bullets shot by Jangi. And the moment it was about to land, a huge dimensional gate opened under its feet. The Totoro could feel the wind direction under its feet change, and it understood that there must be some danger there. In the nick of time, it erupted an intense ice storm aimed at the ground, rebounding itself hard into the sky. But at this moment, Jangi was no longer going to continue playing with it. 6-dimensional gates appeared at the same time, forming a tight and huge hexahedron around it. Void coffin. The Totoro had completely entered Jangi's domain at this point, and no matter how much it resisted, it inevitably fell into Jangi's dimensional space. Totoro, capture complete. Jangi looked at the big guy in dimensional space, and in his heart, he didn't really want to kill it. This thing was interesting, and crucially, it was also very cute, and at this moment, Jangi did not have too strong a need for this level of origin. Therefore, it was not necessary to kill it either. This kind of rare beast, on the other hand, was extremely rare. So after a little thought, he injected it with Compound 3 that could suppress supernatural abilities, and then left it to Lele to carry it. Although Totoro's size was large, to Lele, it was only the size of a backpack. "Master, why don't we just eat it?" Flower was already a bit impatient. Its eyes blossomed with burning fire, and its tongue licked around the corners of its mouth. Since the Totoro's body had the aura of the source of God, and its own power looked relatively strong. To a beast like Flower, it was a huge tonic. "It's better to keep it, this kind of creature is very interesting, I'm going to bring it back to study it," Jangi said as he stroked his chin. Everything related to the existence of the source of God was very curious to him. So far, no one knew what something like the source of God was or how it was created. Jangi was a person who liked to know what he knew, and even more so, why he knew it. He still wanted to poke around for more information about this thing. With Jangi giving the word, Flower had no choice but to scratch her paw and helplessly watch the fat meat in her mouth slip away. After Totoro was suppressed by Jangi with drugs, it had completely turned into a large-sized waste. It was only able to lie on Lele's back, its tongue spitting out from the corner of its mouth and an appearance of being at the mercy of others. Spirit Guardian couldn't help but walk over and reach out to stroke its furry back, a layer of redness suddenly spreading across her face. At the corners of her mouth, there seemed to be a smile that surfaced if nothing else. This did not escape Jangi's eyes. He thought to himself, it seems that this woman is not as cold as she appears to be. "All right, it's time for us to leave. We just had a fight here, and although the commotion wasn't too big, there's no guarantee that it won't be noticed. It's better for us to be careful and leave before it's too late. Wait for the source of God to appear before we act." After Jangi finished speaking, he intended to leave with a few people. However, what he didn't know was that the moment he struck out, a hunter who had been searching for him from a long distance away sensed his aura. In the midst of the thick fog, Mourning Soul, the huge white monster slowly raised its head, the blood-red killing intent inside its eyes almost turning into substance. The moment he sensed Jangi's aura, he did not hesitate, his legs violently stomped on the ground, and then rushed over like a cannonball. With just a simple sprint, all the buildings along the way were knocked out of a large hole, and ice, snow and dust rushed up to the sky, leaving a long trail behind him. He was going to kill chaos, because that was the point of his existence. He would give anything to kill his target. No, to him, there was no concept of price at all, for his life itself was meaningless. It was killing that had meaning. Chapter 1037, Chase, Escape. Jangi opened the dimensional gate and after a few shuttles, an early warning suddenly surfaced in his mind. The time echo instinct allowed him to realize the approaching crisis. A strong wind suddenly came from afar, and in an instant, it opened up a huge passageway in the middle of the city. All the trees and buildings along the way were very rawly smashed apart, and the masonry and tiles shattered like tofu dregs. Boom! Jangi faced suddenly, a huge white shadow appeared not far away. He fell from the air, stirring up tens of meters of blizzard. A sense of crisis enveloped Jangi as he subconsciously turned his head to look outside the two realms junction. Only to see a white monster with eyes full of murderous intent staring at him in death. Just such a look brought Jangi a feeling of terror that he had not seen in a long time. The last time this feeling appeared was when he was in the East Sea and encountered Cardalus. Epsilon. These four words surfaced in Jangi's mind at the first moment. The one who came after him was none other than the Columbia Navy's failed experiment, the bereaved soul. He happened to be standing just outside of the two realms junction, without stepping a single inch into it. That amazing insight was jaw-dropping. After Spirit Guardian, Flower, and Lele sensed the aura of the Spirit Guardian, their faces changed drastically, and Flower's hair stood up all over her body. Lele was so scared that he went woof woof. If Jangi was beside him, he might have become incontinent on the spot. A high-end game, an absolute high-end game. He was a gamma-rank devil dog, how could he join a battle of this level? Lele looked at Jangi with a terrified face, the fear making it want to flee immediately. No wonder the crowd reacted this way. Epsilon, the concept of this level was too terrifying for every mutant. The difference between 10,000 points and 9,999 points were all like a heavenly rift. It could be said that after evolving to this level, one was essentially a different kind of creature. Seeing Jangi inside the boundary, the Mourning Soul opened his mouth and his jawbone opened to an unimaginable arc. A terrifying energy coalesced and took shape in his mouth. Jangi's face suddenly changed. Retreat. Without hesitation, Spirit Guardian transformed into a shadow and followed Jangi's side. Flower, who was resting on his back next to him, also transformed into his battle form at the first opportunity. Boom! A purple beam of light was ejected from the Mourning Soul's mouth, ruthlessly impacting on top of Jangi's boundary. A long-lost, terrifying power. This thing, was it the bottom card of the United Force? Damn it, I knew they would definitely send out an Epsilon-level power. He had thought that the other side would send out Cardalus in a dogfight. However, he hadn't thought that the other party had other Epsilon-level underpinnings. The one who appeared here today was also Jangi. Otherwise, if it was anyone else, it would be impossible for anyone else to block a gentle strike from the bereaved soul at Delta's level. The name of absolute defense was not exactly wrong. Jangi had temporarily blocked the attack of the deathless soul with the strong devouring ability of the dimensional gate. However, there was a heavenly gap between the Delta level and the Epsilon level. It was also one of the biggest gaps between the two levels, the level of supernatural energy. Facing a failed Epsilon experiment like the Death Soul, Jangi was certainly able to block his temporary attacks. But apart from defense, he could no longer do anything. And I'm afraid that the huge gap between the supernatural energies in both sides' bodies would be hard to make up for, even if he ate all the remaining supernatural food in his hand. In other words, as long as the fight went on, he would definitely be drained of his origin, and then let the Mourning Soul pinch him alive. Good thing, besides his relatively strong defense, his ability to escape was also really first-rate. If I can't beat you, it's fine if I can run away. Slipping away. Without saying a word, Jangi waited until everyone around him was ready, and after taking a few steps back, he opened the dimensional gate directly behind him. The moment the two realms' junction was lifted, he disappeared 1,000 meters away with Flower and Lele. After losing the blockage of the two realms' junction, the purple supernatural beam directly engulfed everything and went straight through the middle of the huge city. In just one strike, all the buildings within 7 or 8 kilometers were turned into flying ash. This amazing power, even from a long distance away, one could feel its aftermath. Above Star Island, the mutants who sensed this power changed color. The mutants of the United Forces were still okay, they had been alerted by General Horn early on. Therefore, at the first moment they discovered that powerful force, they did not hesitate, and all of them tried their best to stay away. The soul-lost murderer didn't care who you were, as long as it appeared in his eyes, he wouldn't let go of all living things. The mutant side of Washu Kingdom, however, didn't know the truth of the matter. Azure Dragon was the first to make contact with the command center. An abnormal power source has been discovered on Star Island, located in the northeast of the outskirts of Misty Valley. It is suspected to be Epsilon. Not just him, other mutants in the two regions who discovered this energy fluctuation also made reports to the headquarters at the first time. And after Li Tianyang and the others received the report, they immediately paid attention to the news. Epsilon? Could it be that it was Cardalus who struck? The Columbia Navy dares to not speak of martial virtues. Li Tianyang's face changed. If Cardalus made a move, then the result would only be a fish out of water. No one would be able to get any advantage at that time. But right at this moment, Black Tortoise suddenly frowned. His gaze looked into the distance as he said indifferently, "No, it wasn't Cardalus who made a move." In the distant direction, on the seat ship of the Columbia Navy, Cardalus stood with his hands clasped to his chest on the seat ship's main gun, radiating his powerful pressure towards this place. That aura, Black Tortoise was able to clearly sense. It was clear in Emperor's mind that Cardalus was telling the people of the two great regions that they had not broken their agreement. The one who struck was not Cardalus. How is that possible? Could it be that they have other mutants from Epsilon? Li Tianyang said in disbelief. Situ Xian frowned as he walked over and said, that's not possible either. If they really possessed the battle power of 2 Epsilons, there would be no need to compete with us on a level playing field. They can completely rely on force and forcibly drive away our troops. Li Tianyang frowned, but what about that powerful supernatural reaction on the island? Situ Xian had a guess in his mind. He thought that this matter might be related to Jangi. Could it be that it was Jangi who had advanced to the next level? If that was the case, it could be a great thing for the Jiangnan region. Situ Xian spoke directly, I'll contact Chaos. See if there's any news from his side. Chapter 1038, I command. Situ Xian began to communicate with Jangi. It took a full 5 or 6 seconds before the communication was connected. Hello, this was Chaos, over. Jangi's voice was clear and urgent. It was not quite consistent with his usual calm and collected voice. Situ Xian frowned and said, surely it has something to do with you? Chaos, an unknown energy source, suspected to be of Epsilon level, has been discovered on top of Star Island. Do you know anything about this matter? Of course. That energy source you're talking about, he's hunting me. Zhang Yi was fleeing with Flower and the others when he said this. After being targeted by the Mourning Soul, they had no better choice but to flee. If the one who appeared here today was not Zhang Yi, and if it was any other Delta-class mutant, they would surely die. Only Zhang Yi, with his top-notch defense and superb unrestricted displacement ability, could manage to escape his pursuit. However, this did not mean that things could end easily. Zhang Yi could space shuffle 1,000 meters in a single second, and the Soul of Mourning could displace 800 meters in a single second simply by relying on his strong physical body. However, the Spirit of Death could fire highly destructive energy cannons from the air, with a range of more than 10 kilometers. Zhang Yi had to constantly change direction and snake his way to avoid being targeted by the Spirit of Death. He had already sensed that the form of this thing was very unstable. It appeared to be devoid of any sense, only the purest will to kill. Probably the only good news was that he was nowhere near as powerful as Cardalus and Black Tortoise. That was why Zhang Yi had room to maneuver with him. But then, he would not have any extra time and space to intervene in the battles of the others on the island anymore. Aside from being unable to strike at the people of the United Forces anymore, not to mention getting his hands on the Source of God. This was not good news for Zhang Yi. This was because before this, he was supposed to be the strongest contender for the Source of God. In fact, for the Joint Force Commander-in-Chief, their purpose of sending out the bereaved souls was exactly the same. Of course, it was best to be able to kill Zhang Yi. However, if they could not even kill Zhang Yi, then the worst kind of result was that they could completely isolate Zhang Yi's pawn from the chessboard, which was also an ending that they could accept. When Situ Xian heard Zhang Yi's statement, a chill ran down his back. Zhang Yi didn't have time to wrangle with him more and directly transmitted the image of the battle to him. When Situ Xian saw the huge white monster, a creepy feeling made the hairs on his body stand up and sweat. This was a human experiment of the Columbia Navy? After the end of the world, all countries were sparing no effort to develop mutant abilities. As for human experiments, it was a key item for all parties to compete. And Columbia had the world's most advanced genetic engineering system, so they had made a large breakthrough here as well. Cardalus was their most successful product. It didn't occur to me that there would still be such a thing as a Mourning Soul in existence. Situ Xian nervously asked, Chaos, how are you now? Can you hold up? Zhang Yi took a deep breath and made a nimble turn, dodging one of the Mourning Soul's energy blasts. After he dodged it, the location where his body had just been left behind a narrow channel that was tens of meters wide and more than 10 kilometers long. Flower and Lele's hairs stood up all over their bodies, especially Lele, who was already fluttering his big tongue, his dog's life scared out of him. Zhang Yi replied to Situ Xian, what can I do if I can't top it? The opponent has committed a foul and has used Epsilon level power. Is there any way for your side to deal with it? Situ Xian said helplessly, the other side has not deployed Cardalus, and our side will not deploy Black Tortoise either. Now that the two major Epsilon-level forces are facing off, neither one dares to strike first. Thus, we don't have a better way to support you. Jangi rolled his eyes. I see. Then what's the point of fucking calling me? Wait a minute. Situ Xian came to Li Tianyang's front and relayed the battlefield image that Jangi had passed over. Li Tianyang and the other people from the East Sea region came over to take a look. When they saw the monster's appearance, a look of dismay and horror appeared on each of their faces. Wasn't this a Mourning Soul? He's actually still alive. Situ Xian had already guessed that the East Sea region, which was an old rival of the Columbus Ocean Fleet, must know something about this thing. Seeing the reaction of Li Tianyang and the others, he immediately asked, what exactly was this thing? Right now Chaos is being hunted by it. If you guys know any information about him, please tell Chaos immediately. The whites of Li Tianyang's eyes became more pronounced as he looked at the vicious monster in the middle of the image. On this day, he recalled the fear that had been dictated by this monster. The East Sea region and the Columbia Navy had both conducted mutant transformation experiments. Among the mutants in the East Sea region, there was no lack of artifacts. Only, Columbia's genetic engineering was more advanced and crazier. They had first started the development of Epsilon-class mutants. However, this overly aggressive style of acting had brought a huge disaster to the East Sea. The monster codenamed Mourning Soul was once the first semi-successful experiment. The reason why it was semi-successful was because he managed to possess Epsilon-level battle power. However, he was a monster that only knew how to kill and had no self-awareness for the vast majority of the time. The day he developed it, he directly destroyed half of the Columbia Navy's base and slaughtered over 10,000 people. Along with the troops cruising the East Sea region at the time, he also destroyed all of them. Later on, if it wasn't for the fact that Cardalus, a full-body test subject, was successfully developed, coupled with Black Taurus's cooperation, this monster didn't know how many people he would have to slaughter in the East Sea before he would rest. After that battle, many people thought that bereaved soul was dead. No one expected that he would be recovered by the heartless Columbia Navy and dropped onto the Star Island battlefield as a secret weapon. They're insane. Li Tianyang gritted his teeth. No one on the island was safe if this guy showed up. Li Tianyang didn't dare to hide at a time like this. If the Mourning Souls were allowed to rebel, I'm afraid that the entire elite of the East Sea region would die out. He hurriedly yelled at Chaos, "Chaos, listen. This fellow was a failed experiment, he has no sanity to speak of. If we leave him on Star Island, everyone is in danger of dying. I order you to immediately use your abilities to flee beyond Star Island now. Lead him to the depths of the sea." Jangi frowned slightly when he heard Li Tianyang's words. Lure him to the depths of the sea? You mean to say that he won't drown even in the middle of the sea? Chapter 1039, Long Time No See. Li Tianyang said to Jangi, he was a monster researched by the Navy, of course he possesses the ability to adapt to bodies of water. Jangi's eyes flashed with a brilliant aura. Then can I assume that he will be even stronger in the midst of seawater? Li Tianyang's tone stuttered, this is not something I am very clear about. In that battle back then, those who experienced it basically died out. As he spoke, his eyes clearly flickered. Situ Xian keenly perceived the loopholes in his language. Minister Knight. It's not right for you to say that, is it? It was Black Tortoise and Cardalus who teamed up to defeat that fellow in the first place. Black Tortoise should know his abilities very well. This. Li Tianyang was somewhat speechless at once. On the contrary, it was Black Tortoise, who removed the virtual headset on his head and said to Situ Xian with a smile, almost oh. That guy's counterpart was supposed to be an amphibious-type combat unit, possessing relatively strong combat capabilities both under the sea and on land. As he said this, his eyes rolled upwards, but I don't know how. Chaos's underwater combat capability is. When Situ Xian heard this, he had laughed out loud in anger. Li Tianyang. You were simply heartless. How dare you let Chaos take the risk of dragging down an out-of-control Epsilon? Li Tianyang's face was green with veins. Black Tortoise didn't give him any face at all, but he couldn't do anything about it. He could only growl, "What can I do then?" Only chaos is capable of stalling him nowadays. If we let him kill on the island, everyone will have to die. Jangi felt that he had pretty much known what he wanted to know. He directly snuffed out the call and stopped listening to the bullshit from the people over there. After a space shuffle and dodging the attack of the Mourning Souls, Jangi glanced at the white giant-looking monster and a wicked smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. That is to say, he was a monster that only knew how to kill without much self-awareness. Right? Then don't blame me. Jangi was very clear about one thing at this moment: this monster had set its sights on him, and it could be said that it was immortal. No matter how much he ran, this monster would come after him. According to Jangi's character, he should have gone to Black Tortoise or Columbia Navy to settle the matter regardless. But on second thought, both approaches were too risky for him. Mourning Soul was a madman who could not distinguish between enemy and self. If Jangi lured him over and let Black Tortoise solve it, even if Black Tortoise was able to kill him, he would surely be consumed, and in case Cardalis took the opportunity to sneak attack, it was very likely that the entire Huashu Kingdom region coalition army would be wiped out. At that time, Jangi would have more to lose than to gain. As for luring him over to the Columbia Navy, it was even more of a death wish. Not to mention the fact that Cardalis would attack him at the first opportunity. He wasn't even sure if the Columbia Navy had a way to control this thing in their hands. Jangi would not take that kind of risk. He had always done things steadily and would not take risks. Since the powerful ones could not be messed with, it would be better to bully the small ones. Therefore, Jangi decisively made a decision that no one would have thought of. With a lift of his hand, 12-dimensional gates appeared within a 1-kilometer radius. 12 mirror worlds. After the 12 doors were opened, Jangi said to Spirit Guardian and also Flower and Lele, "Pick a door and escape by yourself. Find a place to hide and don't be found by anyone." On the island nowadays, the mutants had been pretty much killed. There wouldn't be any danger in the periphery either. Instead, following him around, with Lele's strength it was likely that it would be swept to death by the aftermath. Its mission for this trip was already over, and there was no need to continue following Jangi. As for Flower, it would also be difficult to play much of a role when facing an opponent of the level of a Mourning Soul. With it around, Jangi's movements might be inconvenienced. Just at this time, Spirit Guardian spoke, "You can let them enter my shadow. That way, as long as you live, we will be in no danger." Spirit Guardian's ability was dependent on her shadow, and as long as nothing happened to the chosen carrier, her shadow space would not collapse. This ability belonged to the lower level of Jangi's dimensional space, but it also had its convenient aspect, which was that it could at the flow of time was the same as the outside world, and it could allow creatures to survive in it. However, in such a dangerous moment, Spirit Guardian did not abandon Jangi to escape alone, so Jangi could not help but become much more impressed with her. After thinking about it, Jangi said, "All right then, you guys will follow me." Flower and Lele entered the shadow space, and then Spirit Guardian clung to Jangi's body and followed him around. Instead of fleeing Star Island as the others thought, Jangi suddenly changed direction and traveled towards the Misty Valley. "Were you the enemy? Well then, I'll drag everyone on top of Star Island and we'll all die together." As he thought, Mourning Soul didn't hesitate, directly locking the direction he fled in and chasing after him. Inside Mourning Soul's eyes, the will to kill was rising high. Other than killing Jangi, he did not have any extra thoughts right now. There were times when this kind of crazy guy was the most terrifying because he would not be bound by anything and could sacrifice everything, including his own life, in order to kill his target. And as far as the Columbia Navy was concerned, his life didn't matter. As a remnant, he had been broken and tattered long ago. The moment he was unsealed, he wouldn't have more than 24 hours to live. He was already at the end of a certain death. Arana City. Sky Dragon King and Vice Leader White Lotus were hiding in the middle of a deep underground cave. The duo eliminated the toxins left in their bodies by Hearst while waiting for the opening of the Misty Valley battlefield. The duo had made a decision that unless they waited until the start of the final battle, they would absolutely not make another move. This battle was about whether or not the Sky Dragon pirates could rise again. Therefore, they could no longer afford any more slip-ups. The source of God, I must obtain it. Sky Dragon King clenched his casserole-sized fist and said so. White Lotus was sitting on a rock with a pile of compressed crackers in front of him. As for the drinking water, it was formed by melting the ice that White Lotus had turned into by condensing the moisture in the air with his ability. Looking at the Sky Dragon King in front of him, whose fighting spirit was still undiminished, White Lotus' eyes were filled with relief. Lord Sky Dragon King, you will surely become the king of the seven seas. The source of God was only your starting point. One day, you will possess a power that will compel all the major kingdoms to pay attention. The Sky Dragon King took a bite out of several layers of compressed cookies and chewed on them in a big gulp. For now, we just need to wait patiently. As long as there aren't any accidents in the middle, I'll have a chance. Before his voice even fell, the bunker he was in was directly crushed by a massive force. Sky Dragon King was worthy of being a veteran of the battlefield for a long time, and at the first moment, he transformed into his diamond armor dragon form and took off into the air with White Lotus. Who was it that dared to sneak up on me? Sky Dragon King angrily shouted up to the sky. His gaze scanned the four fields and finally glimpsed two rapidly flickering black dots a few kilometers away. It was this glance that made Jangi, who was in the middle of Space Shuffle, notice it. Jangi also did not expect that he had inadvertently dug a loach out of the ground as he dashed left and right with his Mourning Soul. With just a moment of stupefaction, a bad smile surfaced at the corner of Jangi's mouth. Sky Dragon King, it's really been a long time. If you've come, then don't leave, brother is giving you a great gift. He braked sharply in the air before reversing his direction and heading straight for Sky Dragon King. Sky Dragon King also recognized Jangi at this moment. Only soon, there was an existence that caused him even more headaches than Jangi, causing him to pay attention. Epsilon. Chapter 1040 Difficult to do? Then don't do it. The rushing murderous aura of the Mourning Soul, and the terrifying pressure that gave people the creeps, instantly made Sky Dragon King and White Lotus' originally fiery hearts freeze. Don't you come over. The duo stared at Jangi, who was heading straight for them, and roared in terror. Even if they were stupid, they knew that Jangi was intending to bring trouble to the east. But how could Jangi let them go? During the trip to the East Sea, the Sky Dragon King had only sent out his doppelganger, and Jangi and Lingu Feishua didn't have the chance to kill him. But seeing him in this place, Jangi certainly wouldn't be polite to him. With a bad smile on his face, a few space shuffles and he flashed to the vicinity of the Sky Dragon King with flour. The Mourning Soul had only Jangi in his eyes. So without saying a word, he roared angrily and chased after him. Sky Dragon King was furious and wanted to play with Jangi, but the most dangerous thing at this moment was the thing behind him. In the eyes of the Spirit of Death, there were suddenly two more people around the target. Kill! There was only one thought in his mind. The briny spherical head opened its hideous mouth, and a shot of energy cannon quickly coalesced into shape. A plant. Sky Dragon King cursed, then dragged White Lotus and wanted to part ways with Jangi. However, what was Jangi doing here? He was there to drag the Sky Dragon King down. As the saying goes, whoever sees it gets a share. Of course he had to share this kind of trouble with his good brother. Wherever Sky Dragon King went, he directly followed him. No matter how fast Sky Dragon King was, he couldn't possibly compare to Jangi, who possessed the Space Shuffle ability. Jangi swept past Sky Dragon King and gave him a sinister smile. In the next instant, the Mourning Soul's energy cannon flooded the space behind them, blasting over with the momentum of splitting mountains. Originally, with Jangi's speed, he had not been able to dodge 100% of the Spirit of Death's attack. Fortunately, the ability of Time Echo would allow him to be alerted in advance when faced with a crisis, and instinctively make an evasive reaction. This had become a passive ability, where the body unfolded its ability to dodge before the brain. However, Sky Dragon King did not have this ability. His body was directly grazed by Deathless Soul's strike. Then, that huge Dragon King's body, with scale armor that was comparable to the finest alloy equipment, shattered inch by inch like a thin crisp cookie. And his deputy leader, White Lotus, was even more unsuspecting, and was directly blasted into flying dust. Epsilon-level power was simply absolute crushing for lower mutants. Except for an extremely rare freak like Jangi, who majored in defensive abilities and was at the very top of his space ability, it was only possible to stalemate with him for a while. A second later, the Mourning Soul swept past Sky Dragon King's body and impatiently casually waved his hand at him. Sky Dragon King only felt like his body was about to be lynched as every inch of his muscles and blood vessels collapsed. Boom! He was directly smashed deep under the earth. And the terrifying thing was that where he had fallen, the earth had actually sunk down a large area, revealing a bottomless, incomparably terrifying abyss. This scene was extremely bizarre, but Jangi was no longer in the mood to care about the Sky Dragon King's death. Allowing him to delay the Mourning Soul for even a second was a meaningful thing to Jangi. He had originally planned to drag down all the mutants in the entire Star Island. Well, except for those guys from the Jiangnan region. They were just too much of a dish. The command centers of the two regions. Vermilion Bird had just returned with Linghu Feishua not long ago. As soon as she returned, she was immediately welcomed into the medical room to receive treatment from the most professional medical team. Li Tianyang specially went over and comforted her well. This time you lost a Billy the Kid, it was just because you awaken later, your supernatural ability index wasn't as high as his. You don't need to be discouraged, sooner or later, one day you will surpass him and become Epsilon. Besides, didn't you also take out one of the Helix team members? Vermilion Bird heard Li Tianyang's comforting words, her heart was ancient. Billy the Kid had completely shattered the arrogance in her heart. That feeling of losing a teammate in pain and having a brush with death was something she could never forget in her life. It would also inspire her to become stronger. Right now on the island, we still have Chaos and Azure Dragon on our side. But the only decent fighting force on the other side is Billy the Kid alone. I've seen Billy the Kid's ability, Azure Dragon has no advantage against him. But Chaos's ability was to restrain him. It's up to him to fight for the source of God. Vermilion Bird gave her advice seriously. She believed that even if this operation did not go as planned and the source of God fell into the hands of the Jiangnan region, it would still be better than being obtained by the Columbia Navy. Li Tianyang fell into a short silence when he heard these words. Only after a while did he say, "Chaos, I'm afraid I won't be able to survive." Vermilion Bird heard this and asked in dismay, "Why? Could it be that he can't beat Billy the Kid either?" Li Tianyang shook his head. No, it wasn't because of that. Rather, it was that the enemy had deployed the Mourning Soul. Even Vermilion Bird, after hearing this name, his body couldn't help but stiffen for a moment. She was witness to how much damage the bereaved souls had done to the two armies in the first place. In the end, if the two armies hadn't reached a temporary reconciliation and had Black Tortoise and Cardalus join forces to defeat it, the consequences would have been unimaginable. If that had happened, everything would have been terrible. Vermilion Bird closed her eyes helplessly. If Chaos really dies, our advantage in the middle of this operation will also be completely buried. Li Tianyang's mouth, however, revealed a wry smile. That won't happen. With his hands behind his back, he said grimly, "Soldiers are never deceitful. They made all the preparations, don't we have any? Heh. The source of God we must obtain." Vermilion Bird, his hand pressed on Vermilion Bird's shoulder, "You will become the second Epsilon of the East Sea region. There will be no surprises in this matter." Vermilion Bird did not understand what Li Tianyang meant by this. As combat members, there were some crucial decisions and intelligence that they were not involved in. The most important character of a good warrior was to obey orders without having their own ideas. She nodded and said no more, just trust the organization and everything. However, just at this time, an officer suddenly ran over and hurriedly approached Li Tianyang to report the situation. Minister, something big has happened. Chaos. Chaos, he's gone crazy. Li Tianyang's eyes snapped open. Every time something happened that had something to do with Jangi, it was bound to be no good. What did he do again? The officer said with a trembling voice. He didn't follow the instructions and run overseas with the Mourning Souls, but instead reversed his direction and ran to the Misty Valley. Jangi brought the Mourning Souls and rampaged across the entire Star Island. His goal was very clear, and he directly ran towards Misty Valley. Since you all want me to be this ingrate, then fine, let's not play anyone.